Hi, my name is Elliott. In this lesson, we will be talking about the special move called castling. This is a special move that involves two pieces at once, the only time in a chess game that two pieces move in the same turn. We're going to learn not only how to castle and the rules involving it, but why you should castle and when. Always when you castle a king, it involves the king and a rook. Notice that on the chessboard here, we have set up both kings and all the rooks, as well as a few pawns. Every single time that you castle, you first move the king 2 squares towards one of the rooks. King moves 2 squares, and the rook jumps over in the same turn. Notice that rooks normally don't jump, and kings normally don't move 2 squares. That's why this is such a special move. You may only do the castling move 1 time per game. Now the king could also castle with the other rook. Again, the king would move 2 squares, and the rook would jump over. Now you can notice that if the king castles with moving to g1, the white rook does a short jump over, just 2 squares. But if the king castles towards the rook on a1, then the rook has to jump 3 squares. So just remember, king moves 2, rook jumps over. So that is how we castle. Now there are rules involved with castling as to when we may castle. The first rule: neither of the pieces involved in castling may have ever moved in the game. So the king must be on its starting square, the rook must be on its starting square. If either piece has moved away and come back to its starting square, you still may not castle there. Now suppose this rook on h1 has moved somewhere. The king can still castle the opposite direction, king to c1, and the rook jumps over. It doesn't matter that the other rook has moved. You've just lost the opportunity to castle with the rook that has moved. The second rule involved in castling is you may not castle when you are in check. So if we were to add a black bishop on this board and put it on b4, notice that the bishop is now checking the king on e1. It would be illegal to castle now. You must first escape the check. Now there is a good way to escape. Don't move your king, because if you move your king, you've lost the right to castle. But how about you block the check? Next move, you can castle if you're not in check again. Do you remember the best ways to get out of check? Capture the piece that's checking you, block the piece that's checking you, or just run your king away. We have learned so far that neither the king nor the rook may have moved for you to castle, and your king must not be in check. There are 2 more rules. Notice this knight now on b1. White's king could not castle towards that rook on a1, because that would involve the rook jumping over another piece besides the king. You cannot castle by jumping over pieces. And the final rule for castling: your king may not cross a square that is attacked. Suppose that white castles in this position and plays king to c1, and the rook jumps over to d1. Notice now that white's rook is powering down the d file all the way to d8. So black cannot castle here. The king cannot cross the square d8 because of the white rook on d1 threatening that square. Now that we have learned the rules for castling, let's talk about the strategy of when to castle and why. It's best to castle early in the game when there are lots of pieces on the board. Why? Because remember, the king is the target. You don't want your king to be attacked and checkmated, so it's best to hide your king behind the shield of pawns. Notice the rook sitting beside the king to help defend it. Imagine if black had all kinds of pieces attacking. In this position, if your king was in the middle of the board, imagine the danger it would be in. But by castling, your king is hiding over off to the side. In this lesson, we have learned about the special move called castling, the only move that involves 2 pieces moving at the same time, and both of those pieces moving the way they're not supposed to move. The king moving 2 squares, the rook jumping over another piece. You've learned the rules for castling. Your king and rook must not have moved. The king cannot be in check. The pieces cannot jump across another piece when castling, and neither can the king go across a square that is attacked by an enemy piece. Remember these rules? use castling to your advantage to hide your king in safety, and enjoy this very special move in chess.